Can you start by telling us your name and what rank you were in Trinity House?
Yes, my name is David Robbins, commonly known as Mickey to most of the keepers that knew me. I was the rank of assistant keeper when I left the service in 1989, I think it was.
And when did you join? And how?
First joined in September of 1973. I had a very quick service as an SAK, a supernumerary assistant keeper, because just at the beginning part of 1974, Trinity House brought in the month about for keepers on the offshore stations, where they used to do 2 months on duty and 1 month off. They changed it so that it was 28 days on, 28 days off. So a large number of additional keepers were required at that time, and I was one of them. First lighthouse I ever did any duty of any sort on was at the Lizard here in Cornwall. I did 6 weeks duty there, and then followed that with 6 weeks training course at the training school in Blackwall, London. From there I returned to Penzance depot, which I was stationed at, and I was sent to Bishop Rock as a relief keeper for one out there who had to come ashore through suspected appendicitis. I went out onto the Bishop towards the end of November. Initially it was only supposed to have been for a fortnight. That fortnight came and went, and we went overdue by 3 weeks. During that period of time, Trinity House informed me that if I did my following month, then I'd be entitled to my 2 weeks leave, which SAKs were granted at that time. So I stayed out there. At the end of that month, it again went 3 weeks overdue, and it was nearly the end of February before I finally came ashore. Most of my family thought I'd left the world, let alone the service.
Were you married then?
At that time, no, I wasn't married, and no children or anything, so it wasn't too bad. It was quite a rough introduction to the service, and I suppose a lot of people would have thought, well, enough's enough, and left after that. But I knew quite a lot about Trinity House anyway prior to joining. I used to have a brother in the service as well, and so I knew more or less what I was letting myself in for. It was my first ever experience of rock stations. I could have done worse than the Bishop Rock is quite a large internal tower compared with most of them, so there's plenty of movement around. First going off out there, George Williams was the principal keeper, and Larry Walker was the other assistant keeper. They could see straight away from the clothes I was wearing, if nothing else, how green I was to the service. And so when the first storm came up, which it does at that time of the year quite frequently, they proceeded to go around in life jackets and generally look extremely worried, which did my composure no good at all. And I don't mind admitting it, for the first time in my life I was absolutely terrified. The sea was hitting the tower, the place was shaking, it was going up over the top, and it frightened the life out of me. That initial fear, I suppose, lasted just a few hours, and then settled down to basically the monotony of life on a tower rock.
Was it month on, month off then?
Not at that instant. That actually came into effect while I was on the tower. I was promoted to the rank of assistant keeper on Bishop Rock, and when I eventually did come ashore at the end of February, then it was 28 days leave and returned to Bishop Rock towards the end of March in 74.
Prior to that, what was it?
Prior to month about, it used to be that assistant keepers would do 2 months on the station and have 1 month leave ashore. Supernumerary keepers, trainees if you like, used to do 2 months on and only have a fortnight off, so it was quite rough on them at that point. But with the advent of month to month, it was the same for all ranks, be it AKs or SAKs.
Where did you go next?
Well, I did about 2.5 years on Bishop Rock from then, during which time I got married, and so I requested a transfer to a station with accommodation provided for my wife as well. So we got transferred to Suter Point, which is midway between Sunderland and South Shields, up on the northeast coast. It was quite a nice station. We were both strangers, total strangers to the area, but the other keepers at the time made us feel quite welcome. And also being newly married, everything was strange to us as a couple as well. So the time we spent there was about 3 years on the station. Nothing particularly adventurous or anything happened while we were there. It was just normal run-of-the-mill life. Used to be 2 days doing watch duties on the lighthouse and then 2 days off duty, so we used to get out and around and look about the area that otherwise we probably never have seen or visited.
I suppose as places go, Suter's not stuck out in the middle of nowhere, is it?
No, Suter is probably, or was, it's closed down now I believe, it was probably one of the most accessible land stations anywhere in the country, I should think. It literally had a bus stop outside the main gate, so no problem. The buses used to run every 20 minutes into South Shields or Sunderland. From there it was half an hour and you were in Newcastle upon Tyne. So yeah, it was a nice, large, spacious, comfortable station.
And after that place?
From there, got transferred all the way back down to this end again to Pendeen Lighthouse. A bit more remote than Suter, but easily accessible by car, no problem at all. The station is not quite as big, the tower's a lot shorter. There was same sort of accommodation, but whereas Suter was proper up and down houses, these at Pendeen are just bungalows. They're a little bit smaller, but nothing you'd notice.
And after that one?
From Pendeen, my family and myself moved to the cottages at Sennan, Mariah's Lane. Whilst I was there, I got transferred onto what was termed the pool. We're now talking in the middle 80s, 85, 86 period. A lot of stations were starting to go automatic, and Trinity at the time were loath to make anybody redundant, so they created what they termed the pool of keepers, who were then available to go anywhere that they were required. And whilst I was on the pool, I did duty on Needles Lighthouse, Isle of Wight, 2 spells at St Catherine's on the Isle of Wight, Lynmouth Foreland in North Devon, and also St Bees in Cumberland. I think it's Cumberland, I apologise if it isn't. After that I was transferred to Wolf Rock and was out there up until its automation. From there I went to the Longships. Again, I was there for most of its automation. I got transferred from the Longships to Trevose, but in the period between the 2 transfers I was taken quite seriously ill. I never actually did duty at Trevose Lighthouse, never returning from the sick, and from there we moved into this private accommodation, and I was ultimately discharged from the service through ill health in February 1989.
How many years had you done then?
All told, I did 16 years in the service. Had my ill health got better quicker than it did, then I would have still, or would have been in the service for a lot longer than that period of time. Whether I'd still been in there now with the redundancies and what have you, I don't know. Probably not.
Right, back to the Bishop Rock.
Yeah.
Can you explain what it's like living on a tower out to sea?
It's not too bad. You're confined to a vertical form of lifestyle rather than horizontal. I mean, obviously the internal measurements, the biggest rooms are only at most 12 feet across. So you can't go for a long walk in a straight line. You're confined to going up and down. Towards the end, when the helipads were installed on top, then you could stretch your legs more freely on the pads. But inside the towers, it was a vertical form of life rather than horizontal. Each level just contained one room, be it storage rooms for fuel oil or whatever. There was a kitchen, bedroom, a sitting room, big luxury on the Bishop, sitting room, and then service rooms, and finally the lantern on top. I've heard it called being rather like a rat living inside a lamppost, really, which is a fair description.
Now, you've done all sorts of reliefs, you were saying.
Yeah, when I first went out to the Bishop, it was a boat relief. We used to have to cross to the Isles of Scilly either by the steamer Salonian or fly out on British Airways helicopter. And then we'd meet the local boatman, G. Hicks at the time. He knew the waters around the Bishop and around Scilly in general intimately. Never known a chap anywhere who could pilot a boat like him. He would take us out. At the time it was 3 keepers. When I first went out, it was 2 keepers would be relieved and 1 would stay over, and so it would change that way. But when it became month to month about, 3 keepers would go out and 3 would come ashore. You had to be reliant on the other keepers' abilities to get you out of the boat and onto the towers without getting yourself or all of your equipment soaked. And in all the time that I spent on the Bishop, the worst I ever got was wet feet, through using the winches anyway. It looked more hazardous than it actually was. Once you put the harness around you and engaged your feet in the strop, you more or less became part of the rope. And as soon as you were ready to be lifted, then the boatman's assistant would signal to the tower and they would winch you up, and it was no problem really, no problem at all.
Was that hand winch or electric winch then?
That was hand winches. There was, as I say, at the time there was always 3 keepers on the towers. 2 keepers would man the winch and the third would handle the back line, which would be used to pull the keeper, the load, whatever, into the tower where it'd be lowered down onto the set-off. The set-off itself was quite a narrow platform, I suppose no more than 4 foot 6 wide. So there wasn't a great deal of room, but providing everybody knew what they were doing and where things had to be, it was quite safe. Quite safe.
And was it on this winch you had an accident?
No, it wasn't on that winch. Bishop Rock had 2 winches. There was the one at the base of the tower on the set-off, and the rope from that used to go right up to the top of the tower and then down to the boat. The other winch was up at the top of the tower on the gallery, and that was a much heavier winch. It was geared ratio, whereas the bottom was just direct turning. The top one had 3 turns of the handle to actually turn once on the drive. And what had happened, at some stage or other, I don't know how it came about, the bottom winch had been damaged and had been ashore for repairs. Well, the day it was due to come back was also the day that the Blue Peter film crew were out there filming. That was with Lesley Judd. I think it was the first time they ever came out. So we'd winched all of them onto the tower. We'd also brought ashore, I think, about 5 or 6 mechanics, because the station was in the throes of being modernised, not automated, modernised. And there were 4 of us up on the top winch, and one of the last items to come back was the bottom winch. Now, the boat that we were working at the time was called the Baru, THV Baru. It was like a small converted trawler, and around the gunnels of this was a wire safety rope. And we'd just taken the weight of the winch onto the winch, and it had lifted off the deck. Well, unfortunately, the boatman had left it slip just a little bit too much and had gone underneath the wire safety strap around the barreau. And as this happened, so the barreau dropped in the trough of a wave, and basically it was just too heavy for us on the winch, and the weight of the boat put such a strain on it that through the gearing, the handles on the winch itself took off like propeller blades basically, and just threw us all off. And where I was working on the winch was the brake lever, and in attempting to go for the brake lever, I leaned over and the winch handles came around, hit me on the knees, in the right shoulder, and caught me in the face. It was such a blow that it temporarily knocked me unconscious, and I was told afterwards I was thrown about 6 feet backwards from the winch. The first recollection that I have of the incident afterwards was coming around down inside the tower in the service room to find the principal keeper, Andy Blower, on the phone to the depot informing them that he was sending me ashore, not asking, telling them, and that I needed medical treatment because it was such a blow to the shoulder that we suspected that the arm was broken. As it happened, it wasn't. It was just dislocated and badly bruised. I suppose I was very lucky. But I was helped then down through the tower, and I distinctly remember to this day seeing the faces of the Blue Peter crew sat in the kitchen, and I'd received through the blow a small cut on the face. It wasn't anything serious, but as you know, most facial wounds bleed quite profusely, and I had a lot of blood streaming down over my cheek, and the look of, well, I suppose abject terror on their faces, it was quite comical really. But, yeah, I shall remember that.
Did you go ashore on the winch then, or?
Yes, I had to go. The only means of getting ashore was from the winch. Because of the blow, my right arm was useless at that particular instant, so I was unable to climb the steps down onto the landing, so I had to be winched out from the doorway, which is some 50 or so feet above the sea level. It didn't appeal to me, but I had no alternative. That was the only time I've ever gone out from the door, and I wouldn't want to do it willingly again either. It was not pleasant, but I had no choice.
You said the Blue Peter team were out there with Lesley Judd.
Yeah.
Was that the famous time she nearly came a cropper being winched on?
That's right. Yeah. Yes, it was. I think that was the time anyway.
Can you describe that?
Personally, I think it was rather overplayed because the harness arrangement, you had a big wide strap which went around your chest. You also held the rope in front of you, and you put your foot into a rope strop. Now, she had her foot safely in the rope strop, and she was holding on to the rope as well. And all that had happened, when she put the strap around her chest, the tightening belt hadn't been tightened enough, and she was holding on to the rope with such force anyway that the strap itself around her back and chest wasn't doing anything at all, and it just fell down, well, to around her buttocks level. It was utterly useless in supporting her, but she was gripping on for such grim death that I don't think she'd have come off with a tire iron anyway, so it wasn't quite as bad. But looking at the film afterwards, I can see, that it was wrong at the time. She was, I don't think, in any great physical immediate danger. Had she let go, she would have been in trouble, yes. But when you're on that winch, believe me, you don't let go of that rope until you know your feet are on the tower.
There's supposed to be an elite club that's walked around the base of the Bishop Rock.
Well, I've done a bit in an elite club. There aren't too many keepers that have actually done it. The rock itself is only some 150 feet long and 50 feet wide. It's got to be calm to get down onto the rocks, and really flat, calm, low water to be able to actually go right around the outside on the rocks. and yeah, I've done that. I did get my feet around at the back end because it's always wet there anyway, but yeah, I've walked on the rocks around the tower.
Now you say you're on the Wolf as well.
Yes, on Wolf Rock.
Now there's a hell of a difference between the Wolf and the Bishop, isn't there?
It's a lot smaller, a lot shorter. They're all strong towers, but I would say Bishop is probably the strongest of the towers. The Wolf certainly shook a lot more, and again, where it is shorter, the sea goes over it with a lot more ferocity than on the Bishop. Yeah, it's also smaller internally. There's no sitting room as such for the keepers, so you're more living in each other's presence all the time. The only privacy you got was either during the night when the other keepers were in bed, or else when you were in bed yourself and had drawn the curtain behind you.
These are all in curved bunks, aren't they?
In curved beds. For somebody my size, quite a little short fella, no problem, but for anybody 6 foot or taller, then it could be fun, yeah. You had to adjust the way you slept. I mean, if you sleep on your left hand side with the curve, it's quite comfortable, but if you decide to sleep on your right hand side, then you'd find your feet and your nose hitting the wall and your backside would be hanging out the bed.
Now the waves on the Wolf go a lot higher, don't they? More regularly.
Oh, they're more regular. It's, I suppose, possibly because the sea is starting to become more shallow, the waves become that much more ferocious. I don't know. I can only put it down to that. But yes, they do hit it harder, and they go over the top a lot more frequently. That was one of my little pleasures, in fact, coming the end towards winter, would be to go up into the lantern and to watch the sea going past.
Right past the lantern?
Right past, over the top, yeah, quite frequently, no problem.
So was it like being underwater then? Or just solid water?
It was rather like going through a car wash, if you can notice, where there's water just hitting the glass all around you, and it hit it with such force that it created a foam, soapy almost effect as it hit the glazing. One of the things that always used to surprise me is when it hit, you'd have expected it to go darker, but for some reason it always seemed to go lighter inside. The light became much sharper. I suppose it was through the reflection through the water, but that was one thing that did surprise me when I first saw it happen.
Was the shaking any worse than Bishop?
I wouldn't like to say either way. Probably a little bit, yes. Probably was.
And did you sustain any sort of damage to the top in the weather, like the helipad or anything?
On the Wolf, we lost one or two of the outer pieces of the pad, but they were designed to go anyway to prevent damage to the main structure. But it was on the longships that we actually sustained worse damage, and that was one of the main inner pieces. I suppose it was 10 feet long by about 4 feet wide, heavy aluminium platform pieces. One of those carried away in the storm. We went up there and that was the biggest piece gone, and several of the outer pieces went as well. But as I said, the outer ones, they were designed to carry away anyway, but this inner piece, I don't really think it was supposed to, but it did. So they made a temporary wooden replacement for it, and I suppose by now it's obviously sorry, but it's just that, you know, the power of the sea to actually move something that size at that height is quite incredible. Yeah.
What made you want to become a lighthouse keeper? Was it your brother?
I suppose partially. He was in the service before I joined, and I'd seen, as I said, I'd seen it through his eyes, as it were, and I liked what I saw. For this area, for West Cornwall, employment prospects anyway are not brilliant, and Trinity House has always been a fairly well paid occupation, so that again had quite a lot of bearing upon it. I don't make no bones about that. There was plenty of free time, the knowledge that you'd be seeing sites and visiting places that now are closed down, gone, or closed to the public anyway. And just generally the lifestyle as a whole appealed to me as an individual. I mean, I know that there are a lot of people that have gained a lot of pleasure from the service through this sort of lifestyle that we lead or led, and there's other people that wouldn't really have lasted 5 minutes because they seek a different form of life. That's just the way people are. I think you had to be of the right nature to settle into the service. You certainly had to be quite content with your own company for quite lengthy periods of time.
Cornishmen seem to be well suited for jobs with the sea anyway, don't they?
Well, when you just look at the geography of Cornwall, you've got it on 3 sides of us. And fishing is inbred into a lot of the families. Yeah, the sea is a big part of Cornish life. Yeah.
Your brother, what was his name?
Keith Robbins. He left the service before I did. He moved from Trinity House into... he became a boatman. So, again, it was a maritime move. I think he could probably see at the time the way the service was going to go and got out of his own choice well beforehand.
So what are your views on the automation, all these places closing down?
Well, obviously, with the way the world in general is going, automation was inevitable. I think it is depriving future generations of a way of life. I personally don't think the automation is a good thing. There's been too much of it. The whole of the Lighthouse service will be gone before much longer. Most of it's gone now. The service that I knew has certainly gone anyway. The Coast Guard service is closing down all around, and you're getting vast stretches of coastline with basically nobody there watching them. I know lighthouse keepers were never actually employed as coast guards or coast watchers even, but we used to anyway because of the position that we lived in. And sooner or later there's just a tragedy waiting to happen somewhere or other because there's nobody there, be it coast guard, lighthouse keeper or whatever.
Now, married life and lighthouse keeping, does it go well?
I don't know. It might, and then again it might not. I mean, the offshore stations, when you're offshore, your wife has to cope completely on her own with everything from changing spark plugs in the car to changing the nappies on the baby's bum to getting the kids to school, seeing to the shopping, everything completely and utterly. And then 28 days later, magically you reappear on the scene, and because you're the man of the house, you feel that you should take over, and sometimes the wife can possibly resent the fact that you've reappeared again, and then bugger me, 28 days later you're gone again. So I don't know, perhaps you ought to think about talking to ex-keepers' wives on that subject, but I doubt if you'll nail my missus down. We had some good times and we made some good friends, and a lot of them we've still got to this day. Of course, there were always the bad times as well, you know. I mean,
I was thinking of like one period of time you can be like you said, month on, month off.
Yeah.
And it's lots of separation and perhaps lots of honeymoons. I don't know.
That's right. Yeah.
And then you got the other end of the scale where you're living on top of each other on a land station.
On the land stations, again, that it could be a lot of pressure, because once the routine work of the station was done, then you were there and basically you were getting under their feet. From my point of view, you see, we got married and moved to a land station, so we knew each other from the word go, from land stations, so that made it easier. It got harder for us when we moved from the land station to the rock station sort of life, because where she had been used to me being around continuously for 10 years, suddenly I was gone 28 days, and that yeah, we went. It became hard for a period of time anyway. Yeah, it took some adjusting. Also, from my point of view, going back to the rocks after 10 years ashore. Again, I had a young family, and why do you have to go, Dad? How long are you going to be gone, Dad? And I don't think Dad's ever coming home again. Is what I was getting. But
yeah, because I sometimes think that's what Trinity House forgets. They think it's just the husband who's the keeper, but you're both married to the job, aren't you? Really?
Oh, both married to it. Very much so. Yeah, very much so. I mean, a station like Pendine used to be open to the public in the summer, showed visitors around the tower, and it was frequently enough you would not only find them on the tower, you'd find them in your front room. They'd come in through the doors, looking around, nosing about, and it was quite often very hard to be polite and say, "Look, I'm sorry, this is private, please leave." And there was no privacy from that point of view. The public would be there and they'd be peering in through the windows to see what was behind the glass, and I suppose innocent enough, they visit a lighthouse if they come down from up country, and when you are raised with it, you know what it's about. But if you know very little about the sea, then everything's new and interesting, and you want to see as much as you possibly can. A lot of them didn't realise they were peering into our bedroom or the living room or whatever.
What stations did you prefer then? Was it land or sea?
They both had things to recommend them. Land stations, of course, you were there with your family. I saw my children growing up, and we were able to do things, teach them, just normal, everyday things that anybody takes for granted. But from an individual personal point of view, I used to enjoy being offshore as well, because you had time to yourself. I'm a very I like my own company. I don't bother going out looking for nightlife or things like that. And on the offshore stations, you have time to pursue your own interests, whatever they may be.